And thank you to Alex Das Libe for supporting our show. I enjoy hearing Max's right pitch for Bitcoin. He does left one with Graham. Real question. I work with a bunch of right folks. Excuse the labels. I don't quite understand the question, Alex Das Libe, but thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm happy to take the left's position and to understand it and to try to, because there's both sides have fundamental ideas that are worth talking about, and so, but they all kind of relate to Bitcoin. We were on Alex Jones recently, and the same thing came up where he's like, he was like, oh, Max and Stacy, I get that you're living in El Salvador and it's great, but tell us what's really going on. What's the real, how close are we to extinction type of thing? And it's like, no, it's everything's good here. I mean, if you don't like where you are, move. If you don't like where you are, move. Go somewhere else where you are treated better, your money is treated better, your Bitcoin is treated better. And you don't have to stay planted in some place where we're being disrespected. You're not getting the respect.
And also too, like the projects here, like the volcano, it's a green energy mining project, right? Like that to me, and I'm seeing, when I first heard, oh, Bitcoin's bad for the environment. All right, I'm a big environmentalist, so I started investigating this. I was like, oh, that's not true. Yes, Bitcoin takes a lot of energy, but then I read stories, and this is, again, the mainstream media won't put this out there because the big banks buy ad time on CNN and Fox and ABC and all that. So when it's all these what's in your wallet ads are coming up, they're not going to go, oh, hey, the Navajo Indian Reservation was doing solar powered Bitcoin mining. They're not going to talk about that. And it's like, so the truth just keeps crushing all of the myths about it.
Yeah. Bitcoin doesn't waste energy. It uses wasted energy.
Right.
Like the cheapest energy you can find is energy that's being thrown away. Like old power plants, old hydro plants, old plants that nobody's using, they've abandoned. Well, you can start them up again. They're stranded and no one's using them to mine Bitcoin, which is the hardest money that's ever existed in the history of the planet. And to the extent that you're defunding the least efficient, worst industry of the planet, without a doubt, would be the war industry, right? It's the most carbon intensive. It causes the most death and destruction. And if you can defund the war industry by funding the Bitcoin industry, not only are you in the greenest industry in the world, that's more than 50% now renewable energy is used in Bitcoin mining, but you're defunding the worst industry in the world, which is the war industry. So yeah, again, it's like the economics there are very, very compelling and very appealing to anybody who says, oh, I'm an environmentalist and I'm pro-peace. Okay, well then you're a Bitcoiner.
Then you're a Bitcoiner.
And Greenpeace should be the biggest advocate of Bitcoin in the world, because it's environmentally friendly and they're into peace. It's green peace. Okay, that is an advertisement for Bitcoin. It's green and it's about peace, right? Their whole arguments against Bitcoin are completely misinformed. They put out a lot of information that's dead wrong. I mean, I used to do some campaigning for Greenpeace back, 10, 15 years ago. And this was in Europe, in Amsterdam, and in the Netherlands. And I had a campaign at that time called Karma Bank, where you're defunding corporations using financial, slick, clever financial tricks. And so Greenpeace was interested. And I talked to first of all, a couple of things. I talked to their leader at the time, Gerard Leopold, who was the executive director of Greenpeace. And he made a couple of points. First of all, he said, what I was talking about is accurate, but it would scare the average Greenpeace donor because it's kind of sophisticated and financial, and that the average Greenpeace donor, the people they rely on to throw $5 into a bucket on the street, it would alienate them. So even though what I was saying was correct, it would alienate the donor of the unsophisticated donor. So he didn't want to do it. Then I did some further investigation. And so I said, well, how much money, I found out how much money does Greenpeace have, in the bank, in their strategic reserve, as an organization. So they had about 100 million euros, okay, just sitting in the bank. I'm like, well, what bank is that? And they told me the bank. And I'm like, the biggest borrower from that bank is ExxonMobil, is Chevron. You're funding the oil companies. You're giving them cheap money. So in fact, if you looked at this economically, if you were to shut Greenpeace down today, the amount of carbon emissions into the atmosphere would be cut, because you would be defunding the biggest atmospheric carbon generator that's using your money to go and generate carbon emissions. So your economics are horrible. They don't work. But, they are the ultimate virtue signaling organization. They love to think that they're doing something positive by showing, a rabbit in a tree crying, and that this needs to stop by any means necessary. If I take myself to a steamroller and throw myself off a cliff, I'm going to epoxy my hands to the tarmac of LaGuardia Airport to save the environment. Well, guess what? They already have insurance against that. They're covered by people gluing themselves to the tarmac. And all you did was make their insurance more expensive, which means they're going to have to borrow money from the same bank that's funding the polluters that you're protesting against. Again, you're causing more of a problem. Economically, if you look at the numbers, the actual raw numbers of what you're doing are causing more emissions. You're actually doing the exact opposite of what you think you're doing, because you refuse to look at the economics, because you don't think economics applies. It's just virtue signaling that if you have the right idea and you feel good about this, that's ultimately what's going to save the day. But the economics, what you're saying, prove that completely false. If you were truly interested in being green and being peaceful, you would embrace Bitcoin. You would put that $100 million in the bank into Bitcoin, number one.
And how much power would Greenpeace then have if let's say it did this just a year ago when Bitcoin was at the 28, 29 level? They put $100 million and now we're at 50. How much extra capital would they have to where then they could do stuff like, we're going to look at how the lobbyists work in Washington, right? What if Greenpeace goes, nah, we've got $1 billion of lobby money. We're going to get every green law passed, and we're going to do what the Koch brothers have done.
Exactly.
Only we're going to do it with our Bitcoin capital, and we're going to force these laws, because this is the thing that I try to get lefties to understand too. I go, protesting in the streets, good for you, that's great, make your voice heard. But I go, the people in power only understand money. They do not care. Like, when you threaten their money, then they change their mind. I'll give you a great example of the Washington Redskins football team. Their owner, Snyder, was like, I'm never changing the name. Everyone's like, that's an offensive name. It would be like saying the New York Kikes or whatever. It's an offensive name, right? Well, during the summer of 2020, when everyone was protesting, Black Lives Matter said, hey, FedEx, we're coming at you. And FedEx said, no, you're not. Hey, Washington Redskins, we're going to pull our $500 million stadium licensing deal. And all of a sudden, Snyder woke up and said, well, we got a new name for the team. We're going to call it the Washington Football Club.
All right.
That happened overnight because you put economic pressure on FedEx. And FedEx said, we don't want the bad. FedEx crunched the numbers and said, if we're considered the racist shipping department, we're done,
Yeah.
And
now you've triggered me.
I know. All right.
Now you've triggered me. This line in the middle of the desk.
I know.
This line is there's between right and left has been breached. Okay, so,
but that's my pitch to lefties. That's
the economic pressure that can be borne from activists on corporations to behave in ways that would be more beneficial to the community is correct, right? And that is a good example, certainly, is that the economics are such that a boycott, this is what Karma Bank was all about. In other words, Karma Bank was that you can weaponize a boycott. And the way to do it is you list all the companies in the world that are being boycotted, and you list them in the order in which the companies are most vulnerable to a boycott. So let's say Coca-Cola, because the stock price is trading at a very high multiple of sales, it would be more vulnerable to a boycott than Exxon, which trades at a low multiple of sales, because the consumer is not as impactful on the conglomerate of Exxon by withholding $1 at the pump. But if they withhold $1 at the store and don't buy Coca-Cola, it has a direct impact on the top line, the bottom line, and the stock market price of that company. So if you took all these activists around the world and you focused them on this one metric, vulnerability to a boycott, and then you got top line diminishment of sales to the point where stock price was impacted, you would attract hedge funds who are basically mercenaries, and they would start selling that stock short. And then stock would go down more, and then that would bring in more activists. So you had a virtuous cycle of co-opting hedge funds in the cause of activism to decapitalize companies that were deemed outside of the benefit of societies. It's called the Karma Bank and Karma Bank Index. And when I went to hedge funds about this, they said, we don't give a shit. Just give us a trade and we'll do it. Give us the Karma Bank Index. We're happy to make money on this. We don't care. Fine. But when I went to Greenpeace, they said, no, you'd alienate our core donor of the $5 guy, even though I know what you say is working. So like we were, very far along with this. I was working with Zach Goldsmith of the Ecologist magazine, not the Economist, but the Ecologist magazine. Zach Goldsmith is the son of Sir Jimmy Goldsmith, who almost invented the leveraged buyout back in the 60s, right? He's a heir to a substantial financier's fortune. And he was in government for a while. He had this magazine. He's a nice guy, Zach Goldsmith. So he had me writing in that magazine for months to try to organize this campaign. But the activists themselves didn't want to be interested in it because it didn't feel good, didn't make them feel good because it was financial. They just want to feel warm and fuzzy. So they eventually walked away from it until finding Bitcoin. Then I wrote a piece in the Huffington Post called Activists Should Look at Bitcoin. I wrote this in 2013. That Bitcoin is the ultimate. I mean, I'm basically an activist. I'm basically a lefty in that sense. But Max, I refuse to talk to people who refuse to look at the numbers.
I know. Honestly, Mac, this is why I started watching your show on RT around 2017. Because I was like, I didn't know you personally then, but I was like, you were making such sense. I'm like, you're talking, first of all, you're calling out the bankers as the criminals that they are, because you knew you're from within. You're like a whistleblower in that sense. And you were saying this, and I'm sitting there a lefty. I'm a guy who lost my home to the banking system. I'm just totally disillusioned at that point because I thought, oh, he's just as awful as Bush. They're all awful. I hate both parties. They all, Biden, Trump, all of them, lock them up. If I was president, I would perp walk those guys across the north lawn of the White House. That's what I would do. That would be my Bukele tactic. Those are the criminals in America causing the most problems, is all of them. And I started hearing you say these things, and I'm watching RT, and I'm also watching Chris Hedges on Contact, who's super lefty, but he was also very critical of like the liberal establishment. This is the thing I liked about Hedges in his book, Death of the Liberal Class. And I was like, wow, these guys are like, you were saying some of the things he was saying, but you were saying them in the mechanics of banking and finance on how to do this. I'm like, yes, that's way more effective. Like, I'm an environmentalist. I always get mad when the environment, like these idiots that throw ketchup on a painting or whatever.
Yeah.
Or set, I mean, this was a big thing 20 years ago. They would setting SUVs on fire. I'm like, that's so bad for the environment, you dipshits.
Yeah.
Like, and you were making sound financial sense. And you were talking in a way, and activism. And some of my friends were like, and I'm like, and I knew, I'm sure maybe on certain issues you might be more right or whatever, but I was like, the ultimate thing that you're saying, and this is why I was like, ding, the orange light went off with me with Bitcoin. I was like, oh, we can all use this. And it is frustrating when you have a great idea like you did. You went pretty high up the ladder, I'm sure, at Greenpeace. And then they went.
Yeah, talk to the main guy, Garrett Leopold. He's the main director. Okay, we got in the office with him, with Zach Goldsmith, who's a billionaire, and Skyon, am I saying that word correctly? But of the Goldsmith family, which is huge in London.